We're in a brave new world in health and wellness, and particularly mental and physical and spiritual health. Two states, Oregon and Colorado, legalized psilocybin mushrooms, and in the case of Colorado, DMT and ibogaine, which are the active molecules for ayahuasca, bufotenin, which is another psychedelic, and another one called iboga. All of this comes from tremendous amounts of research. In the 50s and 60s, when people have heard of Timothy Leary, tune in, drop out, so on and so forth. These were Harvard professors that studied psychedelics in conjunction with therapy, found it to be absolutely transformative for the field. And then it was scheduled and made illegal by Nixon. What a lot of people aren't aware of is that when Nixon made that illegal in, I think it was 1960, it was because his goal was to disenfranchise minority voters. Because
this week I interviewed Austin Mao. Austin's the founder of one of the leading plant medicine retreats, Ceremonia. Located halfway between Denver and Boulder, Colorado, Ceremonial is rooted in creating a space for deep healing and transformation. We discussed Austin's personal healing with plant medicines, along with what psychedelic therapy is and who it's for, ceremonial process of ayahuasca, getting unstuck with mushrooms, and much, much more. So really enjoyed my interview with Austin. I know you will too. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right, welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Gryn, and I have Austin Mao on. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian. Good to be here.
Yeah, we have some guest visitors here watching in on YouTube. Coming from Denver, is that right? And excited to have you on, the co-founder of Ceremonia. And would you consider that just like a spirituality retreat? Maybe explain to the audience a little bit about how you started Ceremonia and what sort of led you down that path.
Sure. We are a nonprofit and legal psychedelic church, which means that we serve psilocybin and ayahuasca sacraments in retreat contexts. And we're right now one of the leading institutions in the United States that is legally working with entheogens at both the state and federal level. Federal through religious exemption and state through Colorado's Natural Medicine Health Act.
Excellent. Yeah. And what year did you start, and what made you sort of decide to go down this route?
Started Ceremonia in 2020, and it comes off the heels of my own personal journey with plant medicine. Sorry, in 2022 is when we started, and in 2020 is when I started my journey with plant medicine. In that case, it was with ayahuasca through retreats that I first attended and then supported in Mexico and in Costa Rica. I mean, before we started this call, I was telling you I lived in Costa Rica, which was during the pandemic. And so while, yeah, I like to think I hit the pandemic lotto, because while the world was locked down, I was running around the forest and rivers, totally naked, eating mushrooms and ayahuasca. So
that sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole story there.
Well, share it with us. So you were in Costa Rica in 2020. And how many years did you spend there?
I spent 6-7 months there. And it was really like the peak of the quarantine era. What had happened was I was in China when COVID hit in December 2019.
Oh, wow.
And I'll never forget being in a restaurant and everyone is talking about this new SARS-like flu, right?
Right.
And of course, Asia had SARS before, and so it was big news there, right? And I remember my friend gave me a call who had government contacts, and he said, "Get out of Shanghai immediately. They're going to quarantine the airport." So I booked a same-day flight out. When I landed in LA, 2 days later, the airport was quarantined. So just got out of China. And then I was in my first ayahuasca retreat in February 2020 when the stock market crashed. And I was like, oh no, it's happening here. And so in March, I believe, March 18th was when the quarantine started, or just starting to happen. I got the last flight into Costa Rica. So landed at 10:30 p.m. They closed the borders 11:59 p.m. I thought I was just going to be there for a month learning, getting my scuba dive master license.
Yeah.
Then somehow Costa Rica shut down the beaches, which
interesting.
In retrospect, why would you shut down the beaches?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And all the tourists left, and it was just my partner and I at the time and the Ticos and, the expats that still had their retreat centers there. And we just kind of followed the path of ayahuasca for a few months, Yeah.
What, maybe for people who don't know, you're starting to hear more about ayahuasca and plant medicine. I actually recently watched Aaron Rodgers' special on Netflix where they go into that quite a bit. And he's become big in that. Maybe explain to individuals what the ayahuasca ceremony is and plant medicine in general, so they get an understanding of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And happy to share. I recently gave a TED talk on this as well that people can find online. We're in a brave new world in health and wellness, particularly mental and physical and spiritual health. Psychedelic therapy, which is the combination of using entheogens or, altered states of consciousness combined with a therapeutic or supportive approach, demonstrates orders of magnitude more effectiveness in treating mental illnesses like PTSD, depression, treatment-resistant depression, end-of-life anxiety, chronic anxiety, so on and so forth. Orders of magnitude more effectiveness than the next best treatment, which is some form of a psychiatric medication and therapy, right? Secondly, in 2019, the first psychedelic was legalized federally called ketamine. It's accessible in every major city now. There are multiple ketamine clinics that you could just walk into and get a psychedelic experience, hopefully paired with some form of therapy. In two states have now legalized, Oregon and Colorado, legalized psilocybin mushrooms. And in the case of Colorado, DMT and ibogaine, which are the active molecules for ayahuasca, bufotenin, which is another psychedelic, and another one called iboga, right? And it's under something called the Natural Medicine Health Act in Colorado, which is what we operate under. And all of this comes from tremendous amounts of research. So in the 50s and 60s, when psychedelics came to the forefront, maybe people have heard of Timothy Leary, tune in, drop out, so on and so forth. These were Harvard professors that studied psychedelics in conjunction with therapy, found it to be absolutely transformative for the field. And then it was scheduled and made illegal by Nixon. What a lot of people aren't aware of is that when Nixon made that illegal in, I think it was 1960, it was because his goal was to disenfranchise minority voters. So he would lump in cannabis with heroin, right? Because his idea was the minority voters were the ones using this, and let's put them all in prison, and therefore they can't vote
Hmm.
for the opposition party, right? So then we entered the dark ages of psychedelics. Prior to that, it was the most studied medicine in the history of psychiatry. Over 100,000 participants in over 1,000 clinical studies. I mean, that is huge, right? As of 2013, Johns Hopkins University and then a slew of other universities, including the Imperial College of London, Harvard, Oxford, so on and so forth, started studying psychedelics again. And now it's once again one of the most researched psychiatric medicines, right? And the research very clearly delineates tremendous effectiveness, not only in helping the mentally ill, but also bettering the well. So, for example, I have facilitated over 500 individuals so far, and Ceremonia has more than 250 alumni that have come through our program. Of that, 300 to 400 of them are what I would classify as high performing individuals, CEOs, unicorn, company founders, Fortune 500 executives, so on and so forth. Some of whom are coming in with, what might be classified as a mental illness, aka like depression or anxiety or so on and so forth. But by and large, for everyone, for 96% of those that come here, they say it's the most transformative experience of their lives. And checking back on people after a year or 2 years, it's really incredible because people have gotten married. Some people have gotten divorced. People have sold their companies. People have started new ones. Like people have found their purpose in life. The one consultant who had suicidality and depression became an artist and now sells NFTs, crypto
Wow.
NFTs
Okay.
online successfully, like the kind of life-changing applications are commonplace with this practice. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no. And I noticed there's like 3 day, is there a 3 day? There's and a 6 day. No, there's a 4 day too. And ayahuasca, and then the other one is uh
Mushrooms.
yeah, mushrooms. What if someone's looking at this being like, where do I start? Like what would you say to them and how would you guide them?
Yeah, ayahuasca is very trendy now. For example, you just referenced Aaron Rodgers, talking about ayahuasca. And part of the reason is not only is it a very powerful medicine, a psychedelic medicine, it's also held in a traditional ceremonial container. Now, what a ceremony is it began in the Amazon rainforest, right? So imagine 20 years ago, the only way that you were going to do ayahuasca is you would have to fly to Peru or Colombia or Brazil, take a boat down the Amazon, find a tribe, and have a translator, and they would serve you this brew and then sing to you, right? And sing what's called ikoros, which are sacred chants that they channel from divine spirits that they believe in. Okay. And you would undergo your own process. Now, that same ceremonial process, which can be held individually or in a group container, we've brought to America and, in a sense, like kept the traditions from the Amazon, but also modernized applications for, our lives here, right?
Mhm.
In the Amazon, if you're in a tribe sitting with ayahuasca, well, after you're done with your ceremony, you go home to your hut and to your tribe, right? Here we go home to Zoom calls and podcasts where, the podcaster's kid is coming through the door in the back.
It's
So
not actually, it's not my kid, it's my nephew. But anyways,
okay.
just so people know, I don't have kids.
Okay.
But yeah, either way.
Yeah. The
Okay,
point
so
is like
yeah, okay.
it's now, the ceremony component is shared between mushrooms and with ayahuasca, right? So what is left is the actual medicine, the psilocybin or the ayahuasca and DMT. And those are two different compounds that create two different experiences. Something that's very shared is they're both psychedelics. And what a psychedelic experience is like is the way I liken it, and the way I shared on stage is imagine your deepest dream, right? When you're in a dream, you don't know you're in a dream. Yes?
Right.
Right? It feels like reality to you. And that reality could be all sorts of weird, right? You
Sure.
could be flying, you could become a stuffed animal, like so
Right.
so on and so forth, right? The hallucinogenic component of a psychedelic is similar to that. We have visions, we have an embodied experience of something. And the way the science works is there's two areas of the brain called the default mode network. Okay. DMN. This was studied by the Imperial College of London in 2013. The default mode network is your patterning section of the brain. So a pattern might be like, as a kid, I touched this hot pan and I burned myself. Okay, I'm not going to do it again because now a neural pathway has formed between two neurons that says hot pan equals pain.
Mhm.
So then avoid that pain. Yes?
Yeah.
A more complex pattern might be, my parents divorced when I was around 1 years old. And it was, you know, I was getting passed around as a kid, right? From parent to parent. And so a pattern formed in me, like, don't commit to a relationship too much because that can break apart, right?
Mm.
And the way that got ingrained is as I entered into relationships in my adolescent and in my adult life, in the background in my subconscious, there was always this whisper of like, be careful of commitment, be careful of divorce, so on and so
Mhm.
forth. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah, and that's probably fairly common with a lot of people, I'd imagine.
Well,
Yeah.
our default mode network governs so much more than we're even aware of.
Right.
What the lead researcher Robin Cart Harris shares, and he was just on our podcast, is that what this section of the brain does is it tries to make order out of chaos. If we really like sit here and wherever you're sitting and just take a breath, it's complete chaos around us, right? There's no algorithm that can explain how the birds are flying, how the leaves fall, how the wind currents flow, And there's so much information, and you can't even predict what the next person is going to say and how you're going to react to it. There's so much chaos that's happening. We can't live in chaos, right? And so our mind tries to create order by prediction. What that does, though, is when we try to predict things that we're afraid of to try to safeguard us from pain or safeguard us from detachment, we can safeguard ourselves too much. Just like an allergic reaction, what happens in an allergic reaction is you get a bite from a mosquito, let's say, and your skin swells up because that's your body's natural reaction to fighting off the virus, right? But it overcompensates and can get worse and worse and worse to the point where it could even be life-threatening for some people, right? Same thing happens internally in our brains. We try to safeguard ourselves from pain, but then we do so much of it that we're actually keeping ourselves locked into a loop of pain by pushing people away, by disconnecting, by dissociating, by drinking, by so on and so forth, right? So what the psychedelic does is it temporarily quiets the default mode network, aka temporarily pauses our patterns. Yeah. The Imperial College of London put advanced meditators clocking over 30,000 hours and those on psychedelics through fMRIs and found that default mode network to be quieted, just like a child's mind. And what's interesting is if you read accounts of children taking psychedelics, which they do in the Amazon, the effect for them is almost nothing. They experience
Mm.
their normal conscious life, which I think is so fascinating
Yeah.
because what's actually happening, Brian, is our brains are just reverting to malleable childlike brains in an adult body. And so now imagine you're a child and your parents said, "Stop crying. Put a smile on your face." Right? Or you can't say that to Uncle Todd or whatever, right? And then the child's brain starts creating a pattern like, "Oh no, crying is bad. Anytime I feel like crying, I need to instead smile." Right? What happens there is then all the all the hurt that we've learned to shut that down and instead fake a smile and not be authentic with it. What psychedelics does is it allows you to look at that and reparent yourself, to give yourself the compassion in that moment that maybe your parents didn't, right? So instead of your parents saying, "Don't cry, put a smile on your face," maybe your own voice is saying back to you, "It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling now," right? And in that way, we're repatterning our brains and redefining our neural pathways. And those can last a lifetime.
And so, from that standpoint, let's say someone's like, I'd love to learn it, look into this. Is there one pathway you would recommend for them to start if they've never had any experience doing this?
100%. And
Okay.
if people want to message us on Ceremonia on Instagram or on a website, they can do that. Ceremonia Circle, and we'll send this to them. It's the pathway that we hand them. The first is to read books, right? And there are three books that we have people read, and love to share this with your listeners because no matter what they choose, even if they choose not to do psychedelics, like these books are amazing. The first is on meditation. It's called The Mind Illuminated. It was recommended to me by a dear friend who has been learning meditation in the Zen and Buddhist tradition for more than 20 years. And he said that once he got this book, it completely accelerated his path. And
And
he
and it's
learned that he was just a novice.
it's called The
The
Mind.
Mind Illuminated. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Highly recommend this book. And we just have people read the first three chapters. That's it. Okay. The second book is called Letting Go by David Hawkins.
I
And this book is, have you heard of a book called Power versus Force?
think so.
Translated over 35 languages, sold millions of copies. It's a psycho-spiritual book written by Hawkins, who has taught at Harvard, Naropa University, a number of different institutions. And at one point, he had the largest psychiatry practice in the US. Then he went to Sedona, Arizona, became a hermit for 6 years, came out with this book called Power versus Force and the Map of Consciousness. And this is one of the follow-up books that I think is easier to read. Phenomenal book around how to meet our emotions, how to meet ourselves, and not let them stick, right? So often if we have grief or shame or guilt, we like seek to suppress that or project it out or avoid it,
Mhm.
but it gets stuck in us. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which scientifically proved that those emotions can actually create physical ailments, including heart attacks in the future or cancer, because the energy gets stuck in our bodies. So this book is about letting those go. And the third book is called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. It's the consumer book for a psychotherapeutic framework called internal family systems, aka parts work. So have you ever said like a part of me feels this, a part of me feels that? A part of me is really upset at the
Mhm.
situation, right? Schwartz took that kind of language and said that we're actually made up of many parts. And these parts are often competing. And when they're like so many parts that we can often feel like we're going crazy, it's because they're blended together. Like, have you ever loved somebody at the same time as being really angry at them? Like, for those that have kids, that's a very common thing. It's like,
Sure.
I fucking love you, but I really want to strangle you right now, like
Mhm.
Homer to Bart, right? Like, those are two parts, right? That are actually there masking or protecting us from deeper, more tender wounds, which are called exiles, exiled parts. Like, there's like our wounded inner children parts. And so this framework is the one most often paired with psychedelic assisted therapy. It's the one of those that is the fastest growing psychotherapeutic frameworks, period. And when you read these three books, what happens is you are learning to be a facilitator, right? So imagine going into a therapist's office as a therapist, like how much more effective you can be at like navigating your own experience, right? That's what we do, and that's what we advocate for anyone approaching psychedelics, especially if it's your first time. Imagine if you go in as a therapist or as a facilitator, the same tools facilitators have, because these are the same books that we have facilitators read, you know?
Well, it's interesting. One of the books is called Letting Go because I would think that doing something like this, it's just like I do. I mean, I do yoga and some meditation a little bit every day. But like, if you're not going into these ceremonies, I'm assuming with like the intention of just being present and letting go per se, it might be more difficult to get that experience out of it. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it's same thing with meditation. If you're like not wanting to do it or maybe even trying too hard, sometimes you don't get what you want out of it. If that makes sense. So
Yeah, because I imagine in that case, like in fact, the Mind Illuminated talks about this. There's a part that comes out, which is like, I gotta push through, right? And so I take it you meditate often, Brian?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes you ever have that like kind of whiplash effect where it's like your mind wanders to something else and you're like whip it back and you're like, damn it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
And there could be, I mean, for me, sometimes there's a part that's like, man, I got to do better, you know?
Right,
And one of
right.
the things the Mind Illuminated talks about is like that part and says, be gentle on yourself, you know, because the
Right.
more gentle you can be on yourself and actually celebrate that your attention came back to the most boring thing possible, which is your breath, right?
Yeah.
Like then if you can celebrate that over and over, you're positively reinforcing yourself, right? Same thing in a psychedelic. Like I experienced something really hard, you know, we have people do a cold plunge as the final workshop before the actual ceremony because the cold plunge represents something that people are really afraid of. They have lots of expectations on. It invites them to feel into their bodies versus dissociate from their bodies, right? And to hold that with attention. So, in other words, whereas they might normally fight, flight, or freeze, no pun intended, they're invited to like be present with the experience of the cold. So when people go through that, they're always so scared, but after a minute, they're loving it. Same thing with a psychedelic. Imagine visiting your most deepest trauma, but if you're able to train your mind to hold on to it with compassion, with equanimity, with presence, just like you did with the cold, then you're actually able to be with yourself in a place where you would normally run away or fight it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I do plunge from time to time, and yeah, it's like I do it more just for the mental part of it, just sort of the mindset and just like a little bit like you talked before about chaos and getting into the cold and just like quieting everything about that, right? And quieting the mind and just sort of being there. So I like that. That's personally what I like about going in the cold from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Likewise.
And so would you say, I'm just thinking even someone like myself, right? I have some experience with meditation, obviously, and plunging, but never done anything like plant medicines. Where would you guide someone like myself? Once you get past reading the books and stuff.
Could you ask that again? Sorry.
Yeah, where like what ceremony would you tell someone to go to if they've never done anything like this?
Our 6 Day Awaken program is kind of our flagship program. And what that does is there's three ceremonies in it that layer on top of each other. And, we believe that the end point of psychology is the beginning of spirituality. And we facilitate a synthesis of psychotherapeutic practice and meditation into mindfulness practices that ultimately deliver people an extraordinary felt sense of a spiritual experience, right? And we're non-denominational, non-secular. So, we have people who are Christians and Muslim and Buddhists, they all come, or atheists, and everybody has that peak experience. That program, we've already run close to 40 retreats in the past 2 years, 2.5 years of that program, and is really consistent at delivering extraordinary results. Our 3 day program is more like an intro. You come in for a weekend, you do some of our workshops, you have a ceremony, and it gives you a taste of it. That alone, people have described as helping them get unstuck, right? So our 3 day is like you come and get unstuck from wherever you are. Our 6 day with mushrooms, with psilocybin, it's a truly life transforming experience. About 20-30% of the people that come to our 3 day immediately sign up for a 6 day. Okay. Awaken program. And then our 4 day program with ayahuasca is something where it's really about the medicine and less about the process, less about the meditation, et cetera. And it's more suitable for people that have some experience with psychedelics or or deeper experience with meditation. Yeah.
Okay. And what's the journey like as far as going through, like these ceremonies? Like what type of transformations do you see people get that come in and go through all this, or like the 6 day one? What have you seen?
Wow, so much. So we had one guy named Judd that came in, a very dear friend now. In the very first ceremony, he's been in ceremonies before, including with ayahuasca. On my recommendation, he puts on a blindfold so that he can go deeper inwards into himself, right? And I'm watching as he, is stumbling towards the bathroom, and later he would tell me that he thinks that he stepped in my dog's pee. So when he comes back, he asks me for a towel with some water on it. Okay, so he starts, I get it for him. He starts washing his feet. Then he asks me for some soap. So I get it. And he's washing his feet with soap now. Then he asked me for some lotion. Now he's lotioning his feet. And for about an hour and a half, I'm watching a blindfolded 50 something year old man give himself a pedicure. And he's just like very carefully, deliberately rubbing his toes. After the ceremony, he over the post ceremony meal, soup and some bread and some, easy to digest stuff. He said, I asked him, Judd, how'd it go? And he lifts his feet and he says, wiggles his toes. And he says, Austin, look at this. I said, great, Judd. How was your ceremony? And he says to me, for the last 20 years, he has not been able to uncurl his toes without extraordinary pain. And he was prepared to go to surgery in 2 weeks for what the doctors could only think of was rheumatoid arthritis.
Really?
But after the ceremony, and I've checked in on him, months since, never pain again. And it turns out that what was happening for him in his mind, his father was a boxing coach, and he himself now is a high-powered like personal injury attorney, right? And in boxing, you're constantly like pushing off your feet, to create force. And somehow the trauma of like his father constantly pushing him, to achieve, to be better, got lodged in his toes. The same toes that he would use to push off the ground to hit things, which is the same kind of energy that he would bring into his practice to like destroy his opponents,
Mm.
And all of that was like stuck there. That has now been released. That's just one story, and that's a clear story of physical healing. Has some humor on it. We've had people. My mother came. She did
Did that take some convincing?
a lot of convincing.
Because usually, like family members, probably, right? They're not the first to
Yeah,
go. Yeah.
totally. A month later, tumors on her liver disappeared. Her father, or not her father, her physician was surprised and shocked at that. We've had people who processed a recent divorce and really fully let it go and then was able to come back with a lot of love
Mm.
and care. We've had people get total relief from burnout. I mean, you name it. Like we've had combat veteran come who would be so disabled after even a hug that he couldn't walk to the bathroom by himself. And by the end of the retreat, he was singing and dancing with
Mm.
everybody else. He couldn't close his eyes because there was so much kind of trauma living in the system that just to go inwards into himself was too scary. So tremendous healings that are possible.
What's a typical day like for the 6 day one?
We start with workshops and farm to table meals that go to about 2 p.m., 3 p.m. ish. And then ceremonies usually happen. We have two ceremonies at night and then one in the day, in the morning. So our night ceremonies usually start around 6 p.m., depending on when sun sets, and goes till around midnight.
Oh, wow.
So it's a really full day, but people are more energized than they've ever been in their lives. And that's because, you kind of got to feel it to like really understand it. You have no idea how much the stuckness inside of us is actually holding us back, depleting our energy. If you've ever like struggled to wake up in the morning or be like, I just don't want to get up today. I would pose the question to your audience if they've ever had that feeling. Have they also ever had the feeling of great inspiration? Like, I can't wait to get up, or I really don't want to fall asleep. This is too good right now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that unlimited feeling of energy. Imagine having that like for days on end, and then usually for people, weeks afterwards.
That's a long, so 6 o'clock this to midnight. So that's how long the ceremony is?
Usually the ceremony is
Or,
around 5 to 6 hours.
oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do couples come?
Yeah. We have lots of couples come. The vast majority of couples that come I would say I've heard many, many, many times that this has saved their marriages, and a handful of times where couples come and they've decided to, conclude their relationship, and they were grateful for that too, you
Yeah.
know, because they were able to conclude it in a very loving way. But, we like to say in this work, like the medicine doesn't always give you what you want, it gives you what you need. And sometimes that's what they need.
Yeah.
But in general, it enhances their relationship in a way that like very surprising for anybody.
And now you yourself, do you participate in most of the retreats? I mean, or are you there for all the retreats, or do you go to some of them, or you're here?
I led something like 35 retreats before. Now I've passed the reins on to other amazing facilitators that I've trained, and they lead. I come back and lead occasional retreats. I'm planning on leading the March one, Awaken.
Okay.
Yeah. But we have really phenomenal facilitators. A big component of the ceremonies themselves is the music, and the facilitators are so multi-talented. They're not only amazing counselors slash therapists, they're also typically amazing musicians too,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and singers, and it's it's a very diverse range of skills that are part of facilitation. Yeah.
Cool.
For example, our ayahuasquero, our one of my teachers and who serves ayahuasca here, he's Grammy nominated.
Mm.
So like
Mm.
imagine
Yeah. You
being
got like a
under a
concert.
exactly. Yeah, a lot of people come and they're like after the first sermon, they're like, I had no idea this would be a concert. And it's like the best concert ever. Literally the
Yeah.
best music you'll hear in your life.
Also, too, there's got to be some powerful things with music. Like, it's amazing because I've been learning guitar. It is amazing what music can bring to you.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I too have been learning guitar. It's
Oh,
such a incredible journey. I'll tell you, Brian, this work accelerates creativity and learning so much. In fact, our final concluding day workshop, just give you a little preview, is on creativity and painting and singing. And many people have been blocked in musicality their whole lives, including myself. And then what plant medicine does is it totally unblocks that or can unblock that. And I have friends who went on what's called a dieta. It's like you go to the jungle and you sit with ayahuasca for a week,
mm,
every day. And they brought a guitar not knowing how to play a single chord, and they come out playing better than I can now, you
mm.
know? And it just goes to show you like what your mind is capable of when it is unblocked.
It makes sense. It goes back to your analogy with like kids, like,
Totally.
right? Like,
How fast kids can learn a
yeah, they're like
language or like, yeah,
sponges. Yeah.
exactly. Your mind becomes a sponge. And it also tells you like picking the right facilitator is really important, right? Because when your mind's a sponge, that can go both ways. You
Sure.
can learn really great things like reparenting yourself, healing, awakening, creativity, so on and so forth. You could also learn some really scary things because there are facilitators out there that are predators, that are cult leaders, that are so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And what I share with people, like a reasonably good way of detecting bullshit is A, first trust your intuition, but B, challenge the facilitator's beliefs, right? So if they ask them, like, what do you believe about the medicine, right? Or about ayahuasca or about psilocybin, if they tell you, and then if you just ask, how do you know that to be true, right? And if they say, trust me, or if they get angry or they get contentious, probably not going to give you space to discover your own beliefs. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, it's funny. I not funny, but I've this keep these these ceremonies have come up before. I had a former professional golfer, DJ Trahan. I don't know if you're familiar with DJ Trahan, but he
Mhm.
he's gotten into ayahuasca and plant medicines, and also I know some ex-hockey players who have struggled with like concussions who've gotten into the ceremonies and having them help heal from years of playing hockey and having head injuries. Do you ever get any like former athletes come on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, we've got everybody. I mean, because we're, as I said, one of the leading institutions in the US. So we've had politicians, we've had, combat veterans, including like very high level individuals. We've had athletes, we've had celebrities, we've had well-known authors and speakers, like, yeah, you name it.
Well, how many typically are in a group that come for like a 6 day? How many is it capped out at a certain amount?
We cap at 14. Usually it's 10 to 14 people. Yeah. It's a good number. And we have a pretty high facilitator to participant ratio. Usually it's about one facilitator for every 2 to 3 participants.
Mm.
Yeah. But what's really awesome about this program is because everyone's learning to be a facilitator themselves, you know, I started talking about that in reading the books. They're actually able to give each other support. And that's a really big part of the work that we do is developing community, right? And so any person in the 10 to 14 people you can talk to and ask for help. And they would actually be able to hear you and listen to you and ask you questions in a way that you would get with another facilitator. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Not in the ceremony itself, but on the either side of it, like there's a lot of communal support.
Yeah. Very cool. And you have a book coming out, is that right?
Well, I've had a book coming out for a long time, but
Okay.
the best thing right now is on our website. There's a free guide called 3 Secrets to Getting Unstuck, and it walks through our process that I call inside out mastery. First, we go do the inner work, that's mindfulness and psychotherapeutic, right? And then the outer work, which is based on relational connection. And when we are able to master that inside out, it's almost like becoming superhuman. We're able to move through the world in a much more authentic way and attract to ourselves relationships that we've always craved. Because everyone is wanting authenticity. Everyone is wanting confidence, right? Like real, genuine confidence that's rooted in like inner knowing of who they are. And you just become magnetic.
Yeah. No, I love that. Especially nowadays, I feel like we're all like detached to, a lot of people are detached, whether it's through like the work they do with Zoom and like everyone's in their own bubble sort of, but like you're losing a lot of authenticity just because almost like AI as well, right? Like you don't know if it's a real person or not half the time. So yeah, I think this is where, obviously you guys can come in. And Colorado, where in Colorado are you, or like what area?
We're actually halfway between Denver and Boulder. So
Okay.
you fly in, we're 40 minutes from the airport and on a ranch, with horses, and it's really beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. Come visit, Brian.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I'm getting there. I am getting there. My other question was, can you help my golf game?
Well, bring your clubs.
I trust me, I will be bringing my clubs because I'll probably.
What's funny about that? I told you we've had athletes, and Aaron Rodgers talks about this. Like, the dude won Super Bowls, so if he's not a good testament to like improving your golf game, I don't know who would be. But also, you'd be surprised. Like,
yeah,
the unconscious stuckness that we have in our systems governs every aspect of our lives. It's everywhere, and we just don't know it.
Yeah, and just from a golf perspective, like I think what happens too with myself, and I coach golfers as well, is like you get stuck. You're sort of stuck in like this range of outcomes of where you sort of lay, and it's like breaking through, and trying to create a better handicap or create a better score. It's not so easy when you're sort of in this range and you're stuck. And so I can see how doing something like this maybe could potentially help.
Yeah, 100%. Totally.
I'll be your golfer testimonial.
Oh, man. Please. And bring all your golf buddies.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. Ceremoniacircle.org.
Yes.
Is that the best place?
Ceremoniacircle.org. That's right.
Okay. And I'll be looking at, and I'll take a look and shoot you an email if I decide to go through. So I appreciate Austin for coming on and sharing all this with us.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangryn.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.